I guess the easiest and most obvious solution is government subsidies. This is what happened in 2021, 2022 in the lead up to the general elections. Subsidies tend to create more problems than they try to solve because while they help in taming inflation, they adversely impact government spending priorities and always lead to higher taxes. 100% would not recommend. Secondly, another seemingly obvious solution is hoping the Kenya shilling gains against the dollar. While this is easier said than done, it would help in cutting down losses incurred on forex while paying IPPs and servicing external loans. The gains made here should see a reduction in overall costs and an increase in profits. This increase in profits should ease the pressure on required revenue and consequently on tariffs. Thirdly, Kenya Power could and should do a lot more to reduce operational costs and expenses. This can be achieved by ensuring they get quality and value for money in procurement, increase their overall efficiency, upgrade faulty lines and equipment, automate and modernize their grid to model what will be a smart grid. This will go a long way in reducing frequent power outages. Fourthly, Kenya Power should prioritize the purchase of cheaper electricity in future power purchase agreements. While we can commend Kenya Power for ensuring there is no power rationing or load shedding in the country, priority needs to be given to the purchase of cheaper electricity. The graph below shows cost per kilowatt hour in shillings purchased by Kenya Power from KenGen sources and the IPPs in 2021-2022. I've only listed KenGen sources and the IPPs that received over 1 billion shillings in payments in that financial year. It is important to know that despite supplying less than 13% of the power in the grid, thermal power accounts for more than 23% of power purchase payments made by Kenya Power. In some great news, Kenya Power has already signed a 25-year power purchase agreement with Ethiopia for the supply of 400 megawatts of power. The agreement starts with an initial 200 megawatts that will rise to 400 megawatts in the next couple of years. It is worth noting that the transmission line between the two countries is capable of transmitting up to 2,000 megawatts. Lastly, in my opinion, a policy change needs to be effected that states upon the expiry of the current power purchase agreements, all local IPPs, that is IPPs that are domiciled in Kenya and not funded by foreign investment, need to be paid in Kenya shillings by Kenya Power.
I have spoken.
Kenya has the highest percentage of electricity access in the region, with more than 75% of its population having access to power. And being a monopoly, Kenya Power is therefore mandated to connect as many Kenyans to the national grid as possible. As more people get electricity access, more electric devices are added onto the system load. And as more people move up the financial ladder, they are able to afford and add on more devices onto the system load. Therefore, supply has to keep up with growing demand. So not only does Kenya have the highest percentage of electricity users in the region, it also has the highest average electricity consumption per person. A combination of these two factors saw Kenya set a new record of peak demand by hitting 2,132 megawatts in January 2023. The onus is therefore on KenGen and IPPs to step up their generation capacity to meet the 5,000 megawatt target set for them by 2025 from the current installed capacity of around 3,078 megawatts. So is there good news regarding the cost of electricity? Not really. I'm sorry. Or at least not in the short term, as shown in the proposed tariff schedule over the next 4 years. As you can see, power prices are likely to start falling, but this is going to be quite marginal and likely to begin sometime in 2024. As at the making of this video, OPEC has cut production and oil prices are likely to go up. This means more expensive thermal power in our grid for the foreseeable future. But like we said earlier, Kenya Power could and should do a lot more internally to bring down the expenses and consequently the cost of power. The power tariffs will start coming down as Kenya Power gradually sheds off expensive IPPs and starts onboarding cheaper power onto the national grid. Before I sign off, I think it's important to highlight the importance of having cheap electricity in our national grid beyond the obvious cost savings you'd make with cheaper power bills. On a domestic level, having cheap and affordable electricity generally improves your quality of life. It enables you to power essential appliances such as fridges, lights, electric cookers, as well as air conditioning and heating systems. You get to live in a more comfortable and healthy environment as you end up avoiding the unhealthy side effects of burning fossil fuels, charcoal, and firewood for heat and light in your home. While the focus of these videos was on consumer power tariffs in Kenya, commercial tariffs are also just as high. In fact, commercial customers account for 70% of Kenya Power's revenue, with domestic consumers accounting for 29%. Expensive electricity has an adverse effect on the ability of an economy to offer goods and services competitively to its citizens and also for export. Expensive electricity places a huge burden on the local manufacturing sector to produce quality goods in light of competition from cheap imports from countries with much lower production costs. The price of a loaf of bread, for instance, will probably be lower than 40 shillings if Kenya had power prices equivalent to those in Ethiopia. The price of cement and steel, which are the most expensive items used in construction, will drop by anywhere between 10% and 30% if we had power as cheap as in Ethiopia. Perhaps the most iconic images we have in our minds of developed countries is the presence of functional high-speed electric trains. It is not possible to achieve this with expensive and reliable electricity. Expensive electricity, therefore, is a hindrance to modernization and industrialization. The ICT and telecommunications industry requires significant amounts of energy to power their servers, their data centers, their communication masts, as well as intermediary and back-end equipment. Cheap electricity will significantly lower the operational cost for ICT and telecom companies, allowing them to offer more competitive pricing and expand their operations. Lastly, cheap electricity also helps promote environmental conservation by cutting down or eliminating emissions of greenhouse gases from burning of firewood or charcoal primarily used for cooking and heating in the home. Remember, having power blackouts is just like falling sick. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, it feels like the end of the world. Minutes feel like hours and a day feels like an eternity. And when we are sick, it's quite commonplace for us to exaggerate our symptoms. The agony feels endless and unbearable, and death seems like a welcome reprieve. But all is quickly forgiven once we get well, or in our case, once power is restored. A 6-hour blackout will have us extremely irritable. A 12-hour blackout will have us losing our religion. A couple of days without power will have us demanding Kenya Power be taken to the ICC. Electricity feels just as important as the air we breathe. That's how deeply embedded it is in the fabric of who and what we are, what we do for work, for entertainment, and for leisure. I have massive respect for the engineers and the workers who keep the grid running. Most people will never understand how complex the power grid is, but just thinking about the physics that makes it all work sends my mind racing. For instance, in 2022, Kenya Power was operating over 4,078 generation substations, 5,455 transmission substations, 4,669 distribution substations, and 9,170 distribution transformers. Then there's the complex mesh of power lines that connects all these stations together and delivers power right to your building. The total length of the power lines in the Kenyan power grid could actually go around the earth over 23 times. So the next time there's a power blackout, do your due diligence and report the outage immediately. Don't keep refreshing Twitter. The reply might never come. So guard your peace, save your battery, then take deep breaths, go outside, go exercise, do some cleaning, play some board games. Learn your children's birthdays. But in saying this, I do not absolve Kenya Power for the sins against the residents of Kabete. We need and demand cheap, affordable, and reliable power. Nasi tafadhali. So in conclusion, while Kenya Power has its issues, some of which we've highlighted in a little detail, primarily what we have is a type and volume of power generated issue, not so much a distribution and billing issue. So in keeping with this, we'll discuss the power generation subsector in Kenya in the next video.